We are in the book of Deuteronomy as a study on Sunday mornings. You might be visiting today. And so just know that this has been our study this is our third week. We're just taking a chapter a week. And because the chapters are longer, we're not necessarily going through every single verse in the chapter, but we are, I think, extracting the principles that are in each chapter and making those applications. So today will be no different. The first half of Deuteronomy chapter 3 really recounts the battle that the people of God had just fought. It was a battle against a king by the name of Og. What a name, Og, O-G. And he was the king of a place called Bashan, and it was a big area, and God had given the people a victory over Og of Bashan. There were 60 walled, fenced cities and many other cities, a formidable foe. And Moses was taking the people of God back through this recent memory, how that they had defeated them, how that God had given this great victory. And then in the middle of the chapter, Moses offers a special reminder to 2.5 of the 12 tribes. There were 12 tribes in Israel. 2.5 of them had decided that they wanted to stay on this side of the Jordan River. And so what Moses did is he gave them some special advice about how they were to do that and what they should guard themselves about. And then at the end of the chapter, Moses gets really raw. And he talks about a prayer request that he had with the Lord. Of course, you wouldn't know that unless he told you. But he talks about this prayer that he had before the Lord and how that God said no. How that God said no to his prayer. Have you ever prayed something to the Lord that was very deep in your heart and God said no? And yet God used that no answer in a big yes way. And God does that. God used the no answer in a big yes way in his life. And we'll look at that at the end of the message. So Deuteronomy chapter 3, let me just read one verse to get us started. And that's verse number 28. So the second to the last verse of the chapter is the verse we'll read, and then we'll jump right in to the message itself. Where Moses was instructed of the Lord, but charge Joshua, encourage him, strengthen him, for he shall go over before this people, and he shall cause them to inherit the land which thou shalt see. Lord, I pray that you would take this passage of Scripture today and imprint it upon our minds. I pray that you would help us to understand it. Lord, help us to apply it in ways that only you can, by your wisdom, with your help. I pray that every mom would see a special application today. I pray that each one of us that leads in any capacity, as a dad, as a mom, as a teacher, as a leader, as a pastor, in whatever way that we lead, I pray that you would give us insight about how better we can lead. And Lord, bless the reading of your word, bless our interpretation of it. And I pray that you would help us most especially to take the thoughts and the lessons today and make application to our lives. We love you, Lord. Bless this message, I pray, in Jesus' name, amen. I want to talk to you this morning about the 3 marks of legacy leadership. Maybe you've heard that term, legacy. So legacy refers to what you're going to leave, what you're going to leave behind you. One day, not too long from now, none of us will be here. And life is short. We know that when the Bible describes life, it describes life in terms of its time. What is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. So we live lives that are short. The psalmist said, we live our lives as a tale that is told. It's here, and wow, then it's gone. So one day, none of us will be here, but we will leave a legacy. We will leave something, footprints. We'll leave we'll leave memories. We'll leave physical things for the generation that will come. I'm afraid that too often when we think about the word legacy, we think only in terms of what we're going to leave by way of inheritance. The house, money, retirement account, estate, that kind of thing. And while that certainly is a part of legacy, that's really not the big part. And that's not the God part. Now, the big part about legacy is really, what are you leaving your children? And what are you leaving your grandchildren? What are the marks of a person who understands biblical legacy? What are those marks? I think Deuteronomy chapter 3, which is part of a message that Moses is preaching. This first message is 4 chapters long. We'll see the end of it next week, Lord willing. But I think what Moses is doing is he's helping us to understand the kind of priorities that a mom, a dad, a leader should have in the hearts and lives of that next generation, whoever they may be. Students, children, grandchildren. What kind of mark should we leave in the life of these that call us leader? 3 marks of legacy leadership. Using the first half of the chapter, which is really the recounting of the battle that they had won against Og, I want to talk about this point. Legacy leaders interpret life through the lens of God's faithfulness. I want you to think about that statement. I chose the words carefully. Legacy leaders interpret life through the lens of God's faithfulness. You know, there are many different ways that you can look at a situation. You know, look at the situations of your life. Isn't it amazing that people can look at the exact same set of circumstances and see it differently? The famous illustration. Do you see the glass half full or half empty? You know, the way we describe situations really doesn't tell us a whole lot necessarily about the situation we're describing. It tells us a whole lot about who we are. We don't see things the way they are. We see things generally the way we are. That's the way we see things in life. So the lens we have is absolutely imperative for us to examine. You know, what lens do we use in interpreting the things that happen in our life? So I said last week, and I'll expand upon it a little bit today, and that is that we have the obligation as leaders in our families to correctly interpret the things that God is doing in our life, to frame the situations of our life in such a way that our kids and our grandkids are seeing the fingerprints of God. I wonder, as you frame what's happening in your life, as you talk about the things that you're going through as a family, even the challenges that you face, I wonder, are you framing them in such a way so that your kids and your grandkids are seeing God's unseen and yet powerful hand in and among their lives? Are they seeing that? Because it is our job to interpret our lives and the situations that comprise our lives through the lens of God's faithfulness. In fact, what I find in verses 1 through 18 is I find that Moses does that in 3 ways. I think number 1, he does it this way. He does it by making God noticeable. He makes God noticeable. Obviously, God is not seen. We don't see him. We don't apprehend him with our physical senses. So what does Moses do? As Moses tells the story about what just happened to them. And again, they know what just happened to them. Every single person that's in the audience of Moses' sermon could take out a pen and paper and could write all kinds of details about the battles they just fought. They could write all kinds of details about the cities they just defeated. They could write all kinds of details about the land that they just captured. I mean, they all have a perspective. They all live this. Moses is not talking about something that happened in the distant past. He's talking about something that just happened to them. So every single one of them has insight. Every single one of them has insight and has recollection. They all do. And so what is Moses doing? Moses is telling the story with a specific marker in place. And the specific marker that Moses has in place is this was God's doing. This was something that God deserves the glory for. He's interpreting the events of their recent past through the lens of God's faithfulness. And he does that, first of all, by making God noticeable. Here's a good way to look at it. He's being the tour guide of his children's experience. So as you know, I love to take people to the land of the Bible. It's one of the passions of my life. I love to vicariously live through the lives of other people as their eyes are open the first time to biblical sites, as they can see the Sea of Galilee for the first time, or see the Garden of Gethsemane for the first time, or see these areas that the Apostle Paul journeyed in Greece for the first time. It does something for you. It does something for your walk with God. It does something for your understanding of the Bible, and I love to do that. But what's really interesting is when we go to a biblical site, typically it's this way. We'll pull the bus up to the spot, and we'll get off the bus, and the very first thing we do is we go to the bathroom. Okay, because that's what you do. You know, anyone need to use the bathroom? Everyone needs to use the bathroom because we're all 55 and older. So, but after that's done, we walk over to the biblical site, and it's generally the same thing. People walk over, and they're kind of looking, and they're looking around, and they might take a picture or two, and everyone just kind of standing there. And then when everyone's gathered, we have a headphone set that people have, and I'll speak on a microphone. I'll say, now, folks, what are we looking at? Everyone's looking, okay? We're looking right now. Look, folks, we're looking at the Valley of Armageddon. And all of a sudden, everyone's eyes are getting big. Look down there. Do you see that? That's the little city of Shunem, where the Shunammite woman made that little prophet's chamber for Elisha. You see over there, that's the hill of Moreh. That's where the Midianites encamped, the battle with Gideon. Do you see over there, that's Mount Tabor. Do you remember the story of Joshua and the story of Deborah and Barak? There, you remember that story? Look down there. Look over there. That's Mount Carmel. Remember the story of Elijah, the prophets of Baal? Hey, way over there, that's Megiddo. And we begin to point, and people, all of a sudden, it's as if their entire attitude has changed. All the phones are out. All the cameras are out. All the video cameras out. People are selfieing. People are doing little interviews. Well, what you're looking at right now, they just found out 2 seconds ago. You know what you're doing? I'm telling people what they're seeing. Now, they're already seeing it. They're already seeing it. But I'm telling them what they're seeing. Parents, that's your job. Your kids see the situations they go through. They know they got bullied at school. They know that grandma just passed away and we're going down to her funeral. They know that dad's job just transferred and you're going to be moving in 3 months. They know those things. They can see those things as circumstances, but do they see those things? Do they see how God is working? Do they see God's fingerprints? Sometimes if we're not careful, we treat our kids the way we treat carry-on luggage. Right? They're on the journey with us, but we just kind of put them away in compartments, and they don't ever get to look out the window. And it's our job to be the tour guide of our children's experiences, to show them how God is featured largely in all of them. So make God noticeable. Okay? But not only should we make God noticeable, I would say number 2, show God powerful. Show God powerful. Now, God is powerful. He's so big, he's so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing our God cannot do. He is the creator. He is all powerful. He is omnipotent in that sense. But sometimes we don't see him that way. Sometimes we see big situations and we see a small God. Has that ever happened to you? You see a big situation, you see a big problem, and you see a small God. It's your job, mom and dad, to be a magnifying glass to your kids so that when they look through your life, they see God bigger than the way they see him. Now, you can't make God bigger, but you can make God bigger in people's estimation. That's what Paul said. So now also that Christ might be magnified in my body, whether it be by life or by death. That was Paul's desire, that Jesus would be bigger in the eyes of other people as they look through his message, as they look through his testimony. I wonder, mom and dad, is that your testimony? Is that your desire to show God powerful? What's interesting in verses 1 through 18 is that Moses never talks about the strategy they had. He never talks about, well, we sneaked up on this village and we really attacked this one head on and we had big swords and we had really good bows and arrows and we were really, really smart and our generals were really brave. Now, all of those things may have been true. All of those things, but Moses didn't highlight any of those things. Moses, he didn't talk about any of those things. He didn't talk about strategy. He didn't talk about skill. He didn't talk about their collected resources. He talked about God. And boy, as we review what's happening in our lives, we need to see God bigger. Why? Because he's the mover and shaker. He's the one whose fingerprints are all over it. So when we look at that scene, let's see God there. And parents, that's our job. Make God noticeable. Show God powerful. And then I would say, thirdly, show God personal. It's one thing to have a powerful God, and I think that most of us would attest here on a Sunday morning that our God is powerful. There are very few people in the room that would argue that God is creator, that God can do anything. Certainly he can. But is God personal? Have you made God personal to your children? Have you made God personal to your grandchildren? Well, to make God personal, you have to speak of him personally. To make God personal, you have to speak of him relationally. To make God personal, he must be personal first to you. You can't make God personal to your children if he's not personal to you. That's why in a later passage, Moses will say, this book of the law, it should be in your heart. You should love it and then teach it to your kids. See, if you teach the Bible to your kids without loving the Bible, they won't love the Bible either. Because you can transfer knowledge, but the transfer of your heart is only possible as you have a heart for God. And so make God personal. Let me read a couple verses just for sake of time. Verse number 3, the Lord our God gave into our hands Og. Verse number 3 again, the Lord our God delivered all of them to us. Verse number 6, the Lord our God had commanded us. Verse number 8, the Lord our God gave us all this land. I could point to several others. But what is Moses reiterating in all these verses? Our God, our God, our God. Because sometimes, if we're not careful, our kids are like those bystanders. Wow, look at how God works in Moses' life. Look at how God works in Dad's life. Look at how God works in Mom's life. Look at what God's leading Dad to do. No, this is not, God is not exclusive in that sense. No, God is doing this for our family. He's doing this for us. And moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas, that's our job. To show that we're a tribe that serves God. We're a family that serves God. And let me just encourage you, in your family, use a lot of we speak. We speak. We serve God, and we do this, and we love God, and God does for us, and that's important. That your kids are not just carry-on luggage on the airplane of your journey, but that they're there with a window seat, seeing all the things that God is doing, not just for Dad or for Mom, but for us. That's what Moses was doing. Why? Because legacy leaders interpret life through the lens of God's faithfulness. Number 2, this morning, legacy leaders call children beyond comfort to responsibility. I can't think of a more important lesson that this generation needs than that. That legacy leaders call children beyond comfort to responsibility. So look at verse number 18, where Moses says, I commanded you. He's speaking specifically now to just a subset of the nation. He's speaking to 2.5 tribes, the Reubenites, the tribe of Reuben, the Gadites, the tribe of Gad, and then the half tribe of Manasseh. So he's speaking to them, and it says here in verse 18, I commanded you at that time, saying, the Lord your God hath given you this land to possess it. Ye shall pass over armed before your brethren, the children of Israel, all that are meet for the war, but your wives, your little ones, your cattle, for I know that you have much cattle, shall abide in your cities, which I have given you. What is Moses talking about? Okay, here's what happened. He provided that lens of God's faithfulness in verses 1 through 17. And now in verse 18, he kind of segments out a smaller group of his audience and says, now let me talk specifically to you, 2.5 tribes. Now why? Why would Moses do that? Because the 2.5 tribes had a special opportunity that nobody else had. Do you know that God does not make your children the same? You know that God gives them different resources. God gives them different abilities. God gives them different giftedness. God gives them different potential. But you know that your children, they're going to have different places that they live. They're going to have different size possessions based upon their capacity. Yeah, they're going to be, they have different expectations from God based upon their gifting. But under your tutelage, under your leadership, you ought to be training them to be all that God wants them to be for what God has given them. And then warn them. And sometimes you're going to say something to one child in your family that you don't have to say to another child. Sometimes you're going to instruct one child in a way that you have to instruct another child. And what's happening here is this group of 2.5 tribes, that had a very special thing going on. Here it was. Just probably a couple weeks before this, they had approached Moses through their leadership in Numbers chapter 32. And here's what they said. They said, Moses, we have just defeated Og of Bashan, and we have all this land now that is available, and it's great land. It's fertile. It would be great for cattle, and we happen to have a lot of cattle. So it just is logical that we could just inhabit this land. Now, listen, it would be a win-win proposition, because if you let us stay here on this side of the Jordan River, then the 9.5 tribes that go on that side of the Jordan River, they will have more land for them. So it's a win-win. If you'll give us this land, then they'll have that land. We'll both get more land. Wouldn't that be a great idea? And you know what Moses said? No. That would be a discouragement. And you're acting just like your mom and dad. Because what you're saying is, oh, it makes real good sense for us not to fight. It makes real good sense for us to have what we have. And what I'm saying to you is that would actually discourage your brethren. So, and then here's what the Reubenites said. They said, oh, that's not what we meant. Now, whether it's what they meant or not, we don't know. But here's what they said. Here's our readjusted plan. Our readjusted plan is, okay, can we have this land if we do go into the land of promise and fight with our brethren and help them defeat that land, and then and only then we will come back over and inhabit our land. In fact, we will go fight and we'll be on the front line. We'll be on the front lines. Would that be okay? You know what Moses said? Maybe. Here's what he said. Yes, that's okay if, so here's the maybe, if you do it. That's a good plan if you do it. But then Moses said famously, but if you don't do it, if you don't do what you said you will do, then be sure your sin will what? Find you out. That's a famous verse. And typically when we think about that verse, we think about the sin of doing something wrong. But that's not what the Bible's teaching. It's not the sin of doing something, it's the sin of not doing something. It's the sin of not doing something. If you don't do what you said you will do, then you're sinning. It's the sin of omission. So what is Moses doing here in Deuteronomy 3? He's reminding them. And he's saying to them, hey, remember your promises. Just because you have your land, and just because you have your possession, just because you have your comfort level now, doesn't mean that you are exempt from serving your brethren. And don't think that God has called you to comfort. He's called you to responsibility. I'm afraid in America, we don't understand that. I think sometimes we view God's blessing as places of comfort. We view the blessing of children as, well, they don't have to struggle like I struggled. They have more than I had. I didn't own a house until I was, but they own a house now. But are those blessings? Are those really blessings that our kids have more materially than we do? No, I would say that that's incidental. No, I'm glad that my kids have things, but things we know in the Bible are often a detriment to the blessed life. So it's not having things or not having things that's the goal. No, the goal in legacy is, do they have Him? The goal in legacy is, are they responsible to Him? Are they serving people? We really have to change the metric, don't we? When it comes to legacy, we need to change the metric. And the metric needs to be not how much do they have, but how willing are they to serve. That's a much better metric. And so legacy leaders call children beyond comfort to responsibility. I'd say two things to that. Number one, challenge settled people to keep serving. Challenge settled people to keep serving. Too easily, we just kind of get into leisure mode. Too easily, we just get into autopilot mode. And we need to be challenging our children to continue to serve, to continue to grow. I love that verse in Ephesians chapter 4 that talks about the fact that we ought to be engaged in gospel ministry and local church till we all come to the unity of the faith and to the full, the measure of the knowledge of Christ, to the full stature of Jesus. That's what, so the point is this, we're all at spiritual levels. And by the way, your kids are at spiritual levels. It's not our job to feel like, well, I've arrived. No, there's always someone else to help and to serve. And we need to view family as a brotherhood serving together. And that's what Moses was instructing them to do. And so a challenge settled people to keep serving. But then number 2, model brotherhood over individualism. Model brotherhood over individualism. Boy, this is so important. You know, I can tell you this. If you're an adult child here listening today, I can give you a good Mother's Day present. You know what your mom wants more than anything else? And next to your relationship with the Lord now, humanly speaking, what your mom wants more than anything else, and probably your dad, they want you to love, to serve, and get along with your siblings. I'm telling you right now, the number one thing you can do for your parents is love and serve their other kids. Nothing frustrates parents anymore than when their adult children don't interact with each other. Nothing. Jesus said, I know you love me and I love you, but I want you to love each other. That was his last message. I know you love me and I love you, but I want you to love each other. To serve in community, not to have a place of comfort, not to say, well, you know what, that's their problem. No, it's our problem. We're a family, we're a tribe, we're a nation. We're gonna do this together. And legacy leaders lead in that way. And so legacy leaders call children beyond comfort to responsibility. And then lastly this morning, consider this thought: legacy leaders use failure as fuel. I'll talk about that in a moment. Legacy leaders use failure as fuel to strengthen the next generation. So what's really interesting at the end of this chapter is Moses tells on himself. Now let's be honest. That's one of the hardest things to do. One of the hardest things to do in life is tell on yourself. We all want to present ourselves in the best light. You don't find the just got out of bed picture and post it on Facebook, right? You always want to put yourself in a good light. That's why, when you take pictures nowadays, you take like 97 pictures, right? Because there's got to be one good one in there somewhere, right? That's the point. And what we need to understand is that telling on yourself is probably more powerful than trying to create a persona for your kids that they know is not true. Because if anybody knows your failures, your kids do. If anyone knows your flaws, your kids do. Why? Because they live close to the tree. They know every branch. They know every piece of fruit or lack thereof. They know. We can come to church and we can put on the dog and we can kind of fool each other, but you really just don't fool your family. They know. That's why kids sometimes struggle going on for God, because sometimes as parents unwittingly, we kind of make ourselves the standard, and then we never give credence to the fact that sometimes we don't meet that standard, or we're not up to that standard, and our kids see it. They don't want that hypocrisy. The fact is, we're all flawed. The fact is, there's no perfect mom here or perfect dad. So better it is to point to a perfect God, say to our kids, follow me as I follow the Christ, and in whatever areas I'm deficient, I'm going to be humble enough to talk you through that. Transparency is the child of trust. Or trust, I should say, is the child of transparency. Your kids will trust you if you're real and transparent about your own walk with the Lord or lack thereof. They will. So watch what Moses does in verse number 23 rather. Moses is giving us a sneak peek at a private moment in his life when he prayed to the Lord. And it says, and I besought the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, thou hast begun to show thy servant thy greatness, thy mighty hand. God, you're just starting. What God is there in heaven or in earth that can do according to thy works, according to thy might? Lord, you're great, you're mighty. Lord, it's amazing what you're showing us about yourself. So based upon that, watch what Moses asks in verse number 25. I pray thee, that means I'm asking you, let me go over and see the good land that is beyond Jordan, that goodly mountain and Lebanon. Lord, would you please let me go in? Would you please let me be a part of this? I can see it. It's just right over there. Lord, would you please give me a second chance? Now understand that God had already told him no. Remember that Moses had struck that rock when he should have spoken to that rock. It was a horrible thing because God had specifically told him, and what it represented was Christ. It was horrible. And God said, Moses, because you have disobeyed me, you will not go into the promised land. So now Moses remembers that poignantly. And now Moses is saying, Lord, would you change your mind about this? Like kids do. Like we do with our parents. You know, parents will say, you know, you're grounded until 2037. Okay, Mom. You know, I mean, and we ask them to change our, watch what God says in verse number 26. But the Lord was wroth. That means he was mad. He was mad with me for your sakes. He would not hear me. The Lord said unto me, let it suffice thee. Hey, it's enough. It's enough, Moses. It's enough. Enough, Moses. Speak no more unto me of this matter. So it sounds kind of harsh, doesn't it? I mean, it seems like God would say, all right, Moses, you learned your lesson. Why did God kind of hunker in? Why did he dig in and say, Moses, I told you what I told you, quit asking? Why? Why did he do that? Look at verse number 27. He goes on to say to Moses in answer to his prayer, get thee up into the top of Pisgah. Lift up thine eyes westward, northward, southward, eastward. Behold it with thine eyes. Thou shalt not go over. I'm going to let you see. I'm not going to let you go. I'm going to let you see. Charge Joshua. That means command him. Encourage him. Strengthen him. He shall go over before this people. He shall cause them to inherit the land which thou shalt see. So we abode in the valley over against Beth Peor. So legacy leaders use failure as fuel to strengthen the next generation. So how did Moses use this failure in his life? This huge, big, glaring mistake that he made as actually a help to the next generation. Okay, I think in these ways, and we're going to be done. So here's how you can use your flawed testimony. David said, Lord, if you'll forgive me, I will use my flawed testimony to teach people. That's what he said in Psalm 51. We all have flawed testimonies. So how do you use even a flawed testimony to point to an unflawed God? How do you do that? Well, I think, first of all, we need to teach the fear of God. Teach the fear of God. Disobedience has consequences. Teach the fear of God. God is not a God to be trifled with. I think that we have a Hollywood version view of God, and we need to give our kids a biblical view of God. And a biblical view of God is that God has edges. And sometimes God's edges are hard edges. And while God is certainly a God of peace and love and grace and mercy and loving kindness and compassion and all those wonderful qualities that we love to highlight, God is also a God not to be trifled with. And God is a God that we don't treat in a cavalier way. And what Moses was saying by offering this private prayer, this private rejection from God is, hey generation, hey kids, hey next generation, don't mess around with God. He is holy. He is to be revered. Disobedience has terrible consequences. And then use your own life as an example. That's not a bad thing to do. That's transparency. That's humility, that's hope. That's what legacy-minded leaders do. Legacy-minded leaders teach their children that consequences are real, but not the end of God's work. Consequences are really God's work, but they're not the end of God's work, because he can use my negative consequences in a positive way. He can use the no that he says to me as a more defined yes that he says to my kids. So teach them about the fear of God. Number two, teach them about the grace of God. Disappointment can actually be a platform for a renewed vision or greater vision. Teach them about the grace of God. Disappointment can be a platform for greater vision. You know what God did? God said, okay, Moses, I want you to climb up on this mountain, Pisgah. Pisgah is a peak. Okay, so he comes up on Mount Pisgah, and he looks out across. And if you have a clear day in Israel, you can see everything. Like I have actually stood on the high place at Bethel, and I've seen from Bethel the whole country on a clear day. You can look to the west, and you can see Tel Aviv. You can see the Mediterranean Sea. You can look to the east, and you can see Jordan and the mountains of Jordan and Moab. You can look north and south. I mean, it's unbelievable. I've stood on Mount Carmel and seen Jordan. I've seen Mediterranean. I've seen Mount Hermon. I've seen all the way down toward Jerusalem. I mean, you can see. That's what God did for Moses. Moses says, I want you to see something. Now, why would he do that? Because he's giving Moses this grace. So Moses, you're not going to inhabit it, but you're going to see it. And you're going to see it not for your benefit, but for theirs. Because once you see it, then I want you to command them. That's fear. I want you to encourage them. That's hope. I want you to strengthen them. That's resolve. That's what I want you to do. You know what God does, parents, to you? Sometimes he lets you see things he doesn't let your kids see. Sometimes by his grace, he brings you up and shows you things that they can't see, that you now have to show them and help them with. That's wisdom, by the way. And kids, let me just say this, and teenagers, God works that way. And God will lift your parents up and show you things that he doesn't show you. But he wants to show you, but he's going to show you not through a mountaintop, he's going to show you through a mentorship. He's not going to show you by taking you to a place, he's going to show you by taking you to a person. That's why it's important that you have a good relationship with your mom and your dad and spiritual leaders. Why? Because sometimes they are enabled by God to see things that you can't see and help you in ways that you need. That's how God works. And so teach them about the fear of God, that disobedience has consequences. Teach them about the grace of God, that disappointment, your disappointment, moms and dads, can actually be a platform from which you can receive greater vision, because you're going to see it differently. You're going to see the promised land as more valuable because you can't do it, because you can't go there. There's going to be a passion in your voice in your preaching and counsel. There's going to be a tear in your eye that you wouldn't have had otherwise, because you know in some ways you missed out. So leave that legacy for your kids. Remember David? I want to build a temple for you, God. That was his passion. And God says, David, I'm not going to let you do that. You've done some things that exempt you from doing that. But David, I will let you prepare your son to do that. It's the exact same thing. So teach the fear of God. Teach the grace of God. And then finally, this morning, teach the plan of God. And here's the point. God does his best work generationally. God does his best work generationally. This is hard for us short-sighted, results-oriented people. It's hard for us because we want to see all of what God does in one generation. Now, we live in fast food. We want to be able to talk to the speaker here and get my number 7 double cheeseburger here, right? We want to be able to click and have. But that's not the way God works. Even in church growth, there's the attractional church mindset that says, just do this and you have big crowds. But if you can get it quick, it's probably not real, right? It's probably not real. So God does his best work not horizontally. God does his best work vertically. And the way that God generally works is generationally. So think about it. If there are 1 billion sincere Christians in the world, and there may be, What if 1 billion sincere Christians would do nothing other than disciple their own kids? And then in one generation, you have 2 billion. What if 2 billion sincere Christians would do nothing? And we ought to do more than this. I'm not denigrating world evangelism. I'm just saying if all we did was do the priority thing, and that is to invest in our own children, then that next generation would see 4 billion. And by the fourth generation, there'd be 8 billion. That's the population of the planet. That's the population of the planet. I wonder sometimes if our problem in world evangelism is the fact that we don't see how God does his best work. And God does his best work generationally. Moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas, investing in kids, showing them who their God is. That's it. Did you hear the testimonies of those kids? Yeah, it's the morning time, reading Bible with mom. The most important thing she taught me is to love the Lord thy God with all thy... And sometimes moms, you're thinking, it's another diaper. It's another day. This is crazy. I'm making no difference. I'm speaking baby talk. That's my first language. Not realizing that all of those generational investments, yeah. And here we are chasing the wind. Here we're chasing the wind. When you've got the most worthwhile ministry in the world in those children. So invest in them. What's the greatest thing I love about you? Spending time with you, one of the children said. That's where it's at. That's how God does his best work. So let me give you this advice. If this be true, then what do kids need? Time. They need intentional influence. Moses, spend time with him. What do they need? They need opportunity. Strength through repetition. That's how you strengthen somebody. You strengthen them by giving them reps, right? You don't go to the gym and get strong. Going to the gym makes you strong. Over time, it's reps, it's reps, it's reps. What did Moses do for Joshua? He gave him reps. In battle, reps. In leadership, reps. So give them time, give them opportunity, and give them vision. Joshua, here's what God wants to do. Here's what God's going to do. Trust him, serve him. Let me tell you what I see. See, it's time, it's opportunity, it's vision. You're teaching them about the plan of God because God does his best work generationally.